In my 17-year career as a realtor in the Richmond and Vancouver area, I have seen people make these mistakes over and over again, and I've helped all my clients who have bought a condo to avoid these very common pitfalls. So now in this video, I want to help you to also avoid these very common mistakes. My name is Shali Tark. I'm with Heller Merch Realty, living in Richmond, BC team. Let's get into these mistakes right away. Mistake number one is not considering the land when you are shopping for a condo. Now, it's very common for buyers that are looking at condos, 1 bedroom or 2 bedroom, to simply focus in on the size of the unit, the condition of the unit, whether there's a view or not, if there's any upgrades. But one of the things that's overlooked that is important is the land that the strata is sitting on, that the building is sitting on, because as an owner you own a share of that land, so it is very valuable. So if you commonly look at a high-rise unit, let's say in downtown Vancouver, you will notice that it may be a very high density building, meaning there's maybe 150 or up to 200 units in the building, but the portion of land that that building is sitting on is constrained to the footprint of the building, which tends to be just sort of a cross section of the building. And it's not uncommon to find another building very close to it on all sides. So the land that that building is sitting on is constrained. There isn't a lot because most of the density is going into the airspace. Now, if you compare that to low-rise buildings, which tend to be older, you're going to notice that the buildings themselves are shorter and they're broader, but they are sitting on a much larger piece of land. So as a buyer, although of course your initial focus as a condo purchaser is going to be on the unit itself and the condition of the unit and whether it suits your needs, but all things being equal, you should also be considering the land that it's sitting on. Now, if we take, for example, what investors look at, investors typically will gravitate towards the older buildings, especially if they are in prime locations and they are sitting on a large amount of land. The reason that they do this is because not only could they possibly get the unit at a better price because it's older versus the same size unit in a newer building, the possibility that they are looking for as a return on their investment is if the building is getting into its higher age, it may get to the point, and they all will, which is called a wind up, to the point where it's not worth maintaining it anymore. So if you think of an old car, if you have a car that's just over time getting older and older and it's needing more and more repairs, generally you're going to get to a point where you're going to say, I'm not going to put any more money into this car because you're not going to get that value out. It's best just to get rid of that car and get a new car. So coming back to our example of an older building that may be facing that stage of the maintenance where the cost of maintaining the building is just not even worth the building itself, then what you're going to have is potentially developers getting interested in not what the building is like, but what they could do with that land. Now, they're going to come in and offer possibly a buyout to all the owners, so then they can demolish that old building and then hopefully put up a higher density building in that same land. So what you're really getting, or what the investor is really getting, is the investment in the growth of the land. Essentially, a building, which is a material asset, is going to depreciate over time, whereas the land, because it is so scarce, it is increasing over time. I've helped many buyers purchase land and homes in the Richmond area, and it's not unusual to pay up to 2 million, 2.5 million, or even 4 million for a piece of land. And you would think for 4 million you're getting a brand new, beautiful, elegant luxury mansion, but sometimes given the size of the land, you are just paying a lot of value, and all there is on that $4 million value land is nothing but an old shack. So when you are considering a property in the Richmond area that's a condo, all things being equal, you should also be considering how much share of the land you're getting and how much land is available to that particular strata. So that's the number one mistake that you want to avoid, is by not looking at the land as well as the unit that you are interested in that's going to suit you. Mistake number two that most all condo buyers make is they get too focused on the amenities. Now, again, when you are looking at a particular strata or a building, it is not uncommon when you're walking through the common property, which is all property that is building that is accessible to all owners, and not get distracted by the amazing amenities some of the buildings have. Now, you can have spa-like amenities in very high-end buildings. I have taken my buyers into buildings that have bowling alleys, movie theater rooms, music lesson rooms, meeting rooms, as well as large indoor pools, hot tubs, sauna. Now, these are all great things to have at your access without having to leave your home, essentially, but there is a very high cost to these things. So in Richmond, Vancouver area, a 50-meter indoor pool and a concierge are most expensive items on a balance sheet of a strata to have. So don't get me wrong, I have buyers who specifically look for strata units in buildings that have certain amenities that they need, that they value, and I understand that. I have clients who are avid swimmers. They will not look at a building that does not have a pool because it's something that they do every day. So it's not about the amenities, it's about how much value are you going to get, because at the end of the day, it's you as the owner and collectively all the owners that are paying for these amenities through your monthly strata fees. So if you are not really going to be using that pool or that bowling alley or the movie theater room, for some people it's a concierge, they like to have that security, then just know that you are going to pay for it. Now, I've had many conversations where people look at the pool and say, I want to live here, and when I do, I'm going to start swimming.
Be honest.
I am being honest.
And that's great. If that is your goal and that's something you can achieve, then that's a good value for you. But so many times I have chatted with my clients a few years after they've bought into the condo, and I do ask, so how many times have you used that pool? And most of the time it's just, 5-10 times. It's not that much. When you're touring properties and you go look at the amenities, how many people do you see using the pool or using some of those amenities? Most of the time when I'm doing showings, I don't really see it being heavily used, but it is a cost that you have to consider that you are paying. Now, with the concierge, which is also a very expensive item on the balance sheet for any strata, now this is a very limited task position in a strata. If you're watching US sitcoms like Seinfeld or Sex in the City, you're going to see the true concierge service. You have a doorman, they're suited up, they've got the whole outfit, they stand by the door, they open and close the doors, they help you out of the cab, they help you grab your groceries or your shopping. Sometimes they'll even walk your door, they will greet you, and they will generally have a lot more duties that they are responsible for aside from just monitoring who is coming in and out of the building. In Vancouver, this romanticized version of a concierge is not what you're going to get. In essence, it is a person who sits in the lobby and basically monitors who's coming in and out, and that's about it. They may also be helping to accept packages that are coming in and make sure that the building is secure. Now, again, if you value having a full-time concierge, then that is going to be something that you're going to consider in your purchase. But keep in mind, I have seen many times a 24-hour post get limited when they realize that the cost of keeping a full-time concierge is just not feasible financially. So these positions can get cut back to, let's say, 9 to 5 or just shift work. Now, the other thing that you also want to keep in mind, we've said that it's collectively all the owners that are paying for all of these amenities. And so you may look at the listing and say, well, I'm okay paying X amount of dollars for having these amenities, even if I don't use them. But the other thing that you have to keep in mind that a lot of buyers don't take into consideration is that strata fees continue to increase every year. It is not uncommon for strata fees to increase 3 to 5%. That's just a reality. It's costs that go up regardless of how hard the strata is trying to maintain that operating expense. And that's just because things just cost more. Wages do go up. The fee to buy supplies for the pool and the fees to have a pool maintenance, or just generally having the window cleaners and the carpet shampoo people come, all of these costs go up, and these cost increases get passed down to you as the condo owner when you are living in the building. And they tend to happen every year because stratas in Richmond area, they will have an AGM and they do vote. Very seldom do I see a strata not increase. So more than likely, you can pretty much bet on these expenses increasing, not decreasing or staying static. So do not get too distracted by the amenities, as amazing as they may be, unless you really know you're going to be using them and getting your money's worth out of the amenities in your building. Mistake number 3, not paying attention to the building. So we've already understand now that buyers tend to focus in on the unit and they get distracted by the amenities, which is very common. But again, stepping back and looking at the big picture and actually considering the building itself. Now, in my 17 years experience, I have helped my clients to take this sort of macro approach to buying a condo, and this is where my expertise is going to be their biggest asset and is going to help them avoid their largest liability. When we step outside of just looking at the unit, it is very important to also understand what is happening with the building. So even though you are buying the unit, and just like we talked about, you're also having a value or a share in the land that the building is sitting on, you're also, as an owner, collectively responsible for the building. And if the building is not in good condition, then those costs again are going to be passed on to all the owners. So this is one area that we really want to focus on. If we take a look at what investors do, and pardon my French here, but they tend to look at the shittiest units in the nicest buildings. They don't look at the nicest units in the shittiest buildings, if that makes sense. Sorry for the bleep, we'll maybe bleep that out. Anyways, the reason is because at the end of the day, the building is the asset. And if the building is not in good shape, it doesn't matter how much renovations or how beautiful this unit is, nobody's going to want to buy in it unless, of course, they're getting a really good deal. And you definitely don't want to end up down the line selling a unit at a loss, because even though the unit itself is beautiful, nobody wants to really be part of that building and take on the financial responsibility that may be coming down the pipeline. So not to scare you, but 90% of this you can offset by simply working with the realtor who has the experience and the expertise to be able to help you avoid the common pitfall of not understanding what's going on in the building. When we do this, one of the things that we focus on is the documents. We tend to look at all strata documents that are available, typically through the listing agent and or the seller directly. Now, what you're going to want to focus in on for those strata documents to ensure that you understand the condition of the building is the strata meeting minutes. Typically, you can get strata meeting minutes available to you 2 years back. So if you're buying a condo today, that means you should be able to have in hand documents from December 2022 to present. And this is going to ensure that you can kind of get a history of the conversation. Now, digging a little bit deeper into this, you also want to not just read the strata meeting minutes, but you want to look at the frequency. How often is the strata meeting? Typically, a strata meetings are every month, if not every 2 months. Because if they're not meeting regularly, then there may be things that are getting amiss, or just things that are not being taken care of in a timely manner. The other thing that you want to look at, what are some of the continuing issues that just kind of keep getting mentioned over and over again. Now, this is a bit of a double-edged sword, because maybe you're saying, I don't want to have a building that has these issues, but it's also pretty proactive of the strata if they're still talking about it and continuing to find a solution to resolve that issue. Many times it's better to know what is going on than somebody is keeping an eye on it and monitoring it and trying to be proactive in repairing it versus not reading anything about it at all. So don't be too hard on the strata documents, especially when you can see an effort is being made. Of course, some issues you do want to stay away from, but that's where a realtor with experience and expertise can help guide you through that. I help many of my buyers with reviewing these condo documents, because not only do they get a copy, but I review them as well. And before we remove any conditions to firm up the sale, we definitely talk about any issues. Another document that you want to pay attention to is the depreciation report. Now, a depreciation report is simply a health check of a building, a health snapshot, if you will, of the structural components of the building. Everything from the roof to balconies to the parking membrane to the carpet in the lobby. They will dictate in that report what is the remaining life of this asset, how much will it roughly cost, and at what point in the future will this need to be replaced or taken care of. Now, this is great, and again, nothing to run from. You're not going to be able to find any home or any building that's never going to need any work done. That's just not realistic. It's just like buying a car. Eventually, you will have to service it and keep it in a good condition. What we want to look at is that the strata is using that depreciation report and sort of looking at what's forecasted and planning and preparing for those, so there's no surprises. Now, a depreciation report is legislated. This is law that the stratas have to start to get engineering companies coming in and creating a report for each strata. Each building is unique and different, so it's not a report that just blankets a certain area. Each building should have their own. Now, a red flag would be a strata that doesn't have one, because the chances are they're just not financially able to proceed with getting a depreciation report. And it's good knowing that going into it, because unless they're supplementing that information in other documents, a lack of a depreciation report is going to be a pretty big red flag. And another document that you want to also consider and sort of merge and look at the whole, get a better sense of the big picture, are any engineer reports. Now, engineer reports are going to only be available for much older stratas. It's not really common for stratas that are 10 or 15 years old, because in Richmond, the developers of a building really have a warranty for the building in place for the first 10 years. So it's not common for a strata to go and spend that extra money to get additional engineer reports, because essentially the developer is there to take care of any issues. But this is something you are going to possibly see, and you should be able to request if available for much older stratas going 20 years or more back. They should probably have an engineer's report, especially when the depreciation report simply gives you a snapshot, but the engineer's report is going to go into detail as to exactly what is needed, what the cost will be, and how to go about with the actual work, how long will it take, etc. So those are the three documents that are going to give you the information about the building. And there is another document I'm just going to highlight here, which is called the Form B. Now, Form B is specifically going to give you information to confirm things about the unit, such as how much is the monthly strata fee, which we've talked about, which we've also mentioned. It can go up as you go from year to year. And it's also going to confirm things like parking allocations and designations. Allocation and designations are two different things. Allocation is where is the parking spot, where is the storage locker. But designation simply means how is this parking spot or storage locker held legally by this owner. And that is, we can go into more in depth in another video on that. So that's going to be confirmed on the Form B. But one of the things that is also confirmed on the Form B is the amount that is sitting in the CRF. CRF stands for Contingency Reserve Fund. And this is sort of like the emergency fund that the building has. And so when we look at the CRF, we can see how much they have in their emergency reserve fund. And that should also be giving you some sort of a peace of mind that should something happen outside of what is expected in terms of maintenance, that this building is financially ready and able to step in and take care of it without having the owners coming up with all the money in a very short notice given, which used to happen before we had depreciation reports. So it wasn't a very good feeling when that happened, because I've seen sellers that have paid up to $120,000 to $200,000 and have to come up with it in 3 installments, and it's just not something that you want to be in that position. Now, lastly, to sort of make sure that you've covered the condition of the building, I always recommend for my clients to have an inspection company that should come in and basically be able to inspect the condition of the unit. But most licensed inspectors can also have access to the external components of the building itself, such as mechanical rooms, sometimes the roofs, the utility areas, and the service rooms. And then they can also help you to sort of, again, explain and for you to understand what the condition is based on what they're seeing in real time. What I always suggest to my clients is to read the strata documents first before the inspection. That way, if they have any questions, they can sort of have that opportunity with the inspector at the time of the inspection to go over some of those key items, just so you can have a better understanding. A lot of these reports are written by engineers for engineers, and they're just really hard to understand. So it's nice having an extra set of eyes to be able to look at that and to be able to explain it to you in ways that would make a little bit more sense. So that is the mistake number 3 that you want to avoid. Step back from the unit and let a realtor help you to understand what is the condition of the actual building that you're buying into. Mistake number 4, condo buyers only focusing on pre-sales. Now, this is an interesting one, because I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say 99% of the time you are not getting the best value in buying a pre-sale. A pre-sale is in essence a condo that you are purchasing before it's built. But it's kind of like buying a brand new car. You are paying a luxury premium for buying that condo. So if you are buying a brand new car, it's beautiful, nobody's driven it, it's brand new, but you know, as soon as you drive it off the lot, there is depreciation that is going to happen. Now, I'm not saying that in a pre-sale, the depreciation is going to be that extreme that quickly, but most of the time, if you can look at resale options within that same vicinity or that same neighborhood, typically my experience shown that you can get a very similar size condo a few years older and save 25 to 30% on the purchase price. So you are getting a little bit more value. Now, looking at pre-sales, I'm not going to completely knock them. I have helped many clients get into pre-sales, but before we do that, we need to sit down and discuss what your needs and goals are. And there are some instances where a pre-sale is going to be a better fit for some condo buyers. But here we're talking about condo buyers that are specifically only looking at pre-sales and not considering the other options that are in that neighborhood. Now, if you are in the Richmond area, you may have noticed that in 2010, around the Olympic Oval, We got a lot of new inventory that came up. And because it was a comprehensive development, now what I mean by comprehensive development is that you have not just one building going up, but you have a long-term phased community coming in, and you have multiple buildings getting done by the same developer. And part of that community that they are building, you're going to get new retail coming in. So you've got Shoppers Drug Marts, you've got grocery stores. We have in the Olympic Oval area dental clinics. We've also got lots of coffee shops. We've got different types of restaurants, and of course the Olympic Oval itself. Now, a lot of people were attracted to moving into that comprehensive development because, again, it's got that downtown feel, although it wasn't a multifamily neighborhood, where you can go downstairs and pretty much everything is at your fingertips without having to get into the car. But there was a smaller community about 2 kilometers just down the street from the Oval that was built in the early 1990s called Dover Crescent. And Dover Crescent was a very rare 4-building strata that came up in a span of about 5 years, and a lot of the units faced the river. They had beautiful mountain views, but it was unique because it was in a single family area, so it was kind of hidden and very quaint. But when I have clients, for example, very attracted to that Olympic Oval community and they look in there, I pretty much almost always show them the units that are also available just 2 kilometers down the street in Dover Crescent, because I feel there is better value. Typically, the condos were built slightly before the Olympic Oval, so they are older, but a lot of them have kept their value because the location is the same. It's superb on the water, and also a lot of the owners have maintained the condos, and a lot of them are renovated, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. But the real difference in real time is that you end up having a condo that you can literally purchase at about 30% haircut off of the newer units, and yet really that comprehensive development and all the benefits that it brought, it's for the benefit of the whole neighborhood, not just those buildings. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the space, you get the unit, you get the location, you get the better value. And of course, then you are within walking distance to all those great amenities that are also available to you. So when you have condo buyers that are just focused on pre-sales, you have to work with a realtor that can show you the option, because there are chances that you're missing out on great value units that are going to be able to provide you with that same lifestyle, with that same sort of a common benefit of the neighborhood. And you'll be surprised at what you can get and how far you can stretch your mortgage every month if you are just looking a little bit outside of brand new. The other thing to also remember with buying a pre-sale is that you are susceptible to paying a 5% GST on top of the purchase price. So in BC, whenever you're buying new construction, meaning you are going to be the first owner, although technically the developer is the first owner, but you're the first owner occupier, then you have to pay 5% GST, and that is not a cost that is reflected on resale units, meaning you're already buying from the first purchaser. So that's also an added cost that you have to consider. Again, I'm not knocking pre-sales because I think they are good options for some buyers depending on their needs, but overall, like I said, going out on a limb, 99% of the time it is not the best value for you out there. So before you consider a condo purchase that is just a pre-sale, let's chat about it and let me help you to sort of go through the guideline as to see whether you are a good candidate for a pre-sale and that you can create more value versus buying a resale option in the same neighborhood. So let's get into mistake number 5, buyers getting too focused on the size. Now, in my experience, when I talk to buyers and we are sort of compiling their wish list, I do ask roughly the size of the unit that they would like to have. A good indicator of that is what is the size of the unit that you're currently living in. Because if you're looking for more space, then we know that you're going to need something bigger. If you're looking for less space, of course, we're going to go for something smaller. So if they are, let's say, downsizing and they're just looking for about 600 square feet, then that gives me a pretty good idea of the size of condos show them. But there are buyers out there, especially ones that are not working with the realtor, that are just focusing on the size and they're saying, I need 600 square feet. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is it's not unusual for there to be 3 to 5 different measurements for the same condo. There is variation, so it's really hard to know exactly, first of all, what the size is. According to the strata plan that was originally filed by the developers, it could say it's a certain size, and then you can have a third-party floor plan company come in and they do their measurements, and the measurements are slightly off and it comes in at a different size. So it's not unusual to have a discrepancy of 20 to 30, even 40 square feet. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the size, because the size is only one indicator. You actually should be going into the space and looking at how it feels for you. Now, a size is going to feel differently based on many things a lot of buyers don't even consider. First of all, the layout. That makes sense because there are some units that may be 600 square feet, but they have long hallways, or they have wasted space, or it's not a rectangular unit, so there's a lot of weird angles making the space kind of feel useless, really, that you can't really do much with weird nooks and crannies. Another thing that can make the space feel larger or smaller is the size of the windows. How big are the windows? Also, where are the windows? The window placement. That can also make a space feel either bigger or smaller. Another thing that can affect how a space feels is ceiling heights. If you have a condo, typically that's on the ground floor or the top floor, the ceiling heights tend to be a little bit taller. So you can go into 9 feet ceilings versus typically where you are at about 8, just over 8-foot ceilings. And that can also make a big difference to how the space feels. So when it comes to this, you have to be open as a buyer to possibly looking at any units that are, let's say, between 550 to 650 square feet, because it is, again, in my experience, not unusual for me to show my clients a space that's 550 square feet that actually feels more spacious and larger than a unit that is 600 square feet that feels smaller, closed off, or tighter, or just not enough space, especially when you have multiple people living in that unit. So don't get hung up on the size that is physically on the paper. You have to go into the unit, walk through the unit, and go with the feel of the space rather than the actual square footage that is indicated on the listing. So let's get into mistake number 6. I have seen buyers get too hung up on the bells and whistles. So what are we talking about here? Typically, in my experience, I've seen buyers just walk into a space and immediately and emotionally just fall in love with either the staging or the cleanliness, or sometimes just online, they're already excited because they think this is the one because the photos are so bright and they look just so wonderful. And so one of the things that, first of all, we reel back the excitement a little bit first, because sometimes photos overpromise and also sometimes photos underdeliver. I have gone into listings where the photos didn't look so good, but then when you went into the actual space, it was surprisingly a lot better. So before we get too excited about the bells and whistles, you have to get realistic about the value. The bells and whistles are great as long as you're not overpaying for them. It's not unusual for sellers to feel it's staged, I've had it painted, everything looks great, it's a lot better than the unit that was sold recently down the hallway, so let's ask another 10 or 15,000 or whatnot on top. Now that's what the seller is hoping to do, is to capture you emotionally, where you feel like, I would pay a little bit more for this unit, I'm in love with it, I love the way it's decorated. This is a common comment sometimes I hear from my buyers, this is exactly how I would decorate it. And that's great. I'm glad that you have a sense of that familiarity. But keep in mind, when the seller moves out, or when the staging moves out, all that stuff's gonna be gone. You're going to have to bring your stuff in. As long as you are not paying for the bells and whistles and not getting excited over them, then that's where your value mindset should stay. But a lot of the buyers I find gravitate towards one because it's got all those things, versus, let's say, a comparable unit that's priced better that maybe doesn't have those things. And so you have to sort of be able to step back from that emotional side a little bit, and really the practical side that I help my buyers to sit down and look at is, if you have one unit that has all the bells and whistles but it's asking for more, but you have another unit that you could very easily get somebody to come in and do a few of those things and not get even close to paying that much after you pay for your renovation, which is actually a better buy. And again, working with a realtor that has this experience with the possible cost should help you to gain some of that asset back, so that you're not just falling in love and overpaying, which is what the seller is hoping that you do. Instead, you can step back from that and say, I do like this unit, but I could possibly replicate the same style, decoration, or effects in another unit and not end up overpaying for it. So do not get hung up and too distracted by the shiny things that the seller is hoping that you're going to do. The other thing also that I want to highlight here for you is, especially when a listing boasts that the renovations were just completed, I usually tend to want to ask a few more questions. The reason being is, I find that in my experience, the renovations that were done by owners previously, prior to selling, because they renovated for their own use, tend to be better quality than the renovations that a seller might do just to get the place ready for sale. They may not be using the best products. They may not be using the time or the detail to ensure that it is done well. Essentially, it's putting lipstick on a pig. So you want to also make sure, if you are willing to pay for the renovated unit, that you are getting one that is actually constructed well and finished well, so that you don't end up having to fix those mistakes sooner down the line. And the other thing to keep in mind as well is, if renovations were done not freshly but a little bit backdated, then there's the sort of any surprises that were going to happen should have already happened. And again, this is where an inspector is going to come in and be able to highlight or point out these defects for you. But it's really difficult sometimes when it's newly renovated, nobody's lived in it, and when you move in, that's when you start to discover things that may not have been done properly. So in these cases, if you are going to go forward with the one that you fell in love with, as long as you're not overpaying, ensure the inspector is going to look at things for you, because nobody has stayed in that unit, so the surprises are all going to be on you, and we want to alleviate that stress more, so that you are not left paying for the repairs of that renovation. So before we get into mistake number 7, I have one more bonus mistake that I want to share with you. So make sure you watch to the end. It's something hardly anybody talks about. I've never heard anybody talk about it, and I want to make sure that you know all about it. Now, before we go on to mistake number 7, I want to make sure that you don't miss any new videos. So make sure to hit that subscribe button and to hit that bell button so you don't miss new videos. And like this video if you want to see more content like this. So let's move into mistake number 7, and make sure you watch to the end because I have that bonus mistake that I want to share with you. Mistake number 7 that most buyers do when they are purchasing a condo is that they try to go it alone. So many times when I've done open houses, when buyers come in to take a look at the condo, they don't have a realtor, they're just sort of navigating this by themselves. And I think it's great that you are using that time, but it is not something that you want to go it alone. To be honest, selling different types of assets in the last 17 years that I've been helping people move to Richmond, it is actually a lot more work to sell a $600,000 condo than it is to sell a $6 million home. And the reason is because there's just too many moving parts when it comes to buying into a strata. A lot of the stuff that we've already talked about is just the tip of the iceberg. And no two stratas are alike. So you have to do your due diligence and this in-depth work, not just for the units that you're looking at, but all the different buildings. And all buildings are different in their age, their location, and the way they are constructed. I have sold in phased buildings that we kind of talked about, similar to the ones at River Green, at the Oval, and other comprehensive developments, where the phase of the development can take up to 10 or 15 years. And it's not unusual that within that same development, the construction quality and the finishings vary from building number 1 to, let's say, building number 4, or phase 1 to phase 4. So even within a strata, you have so many things to consider that you don't want to go this alone. Now, as a buyer in BC, there is no added cost to you to work with a realtor. The way things are set up, the seller actually pays the buyer's agent's commission through the transaction. Yes, ultimately the funds of the commission are coming from the purchase price, which is what the buyer pays, but there's no added cost to you. So when you are looking at purchasing a strata or a condo or a townhome, you have to make sure that you have the expertise and the skill and the knowledge of an experienced realtor. And as a realtor that's been working for 17 years, I have helped hundreds of clients to navigate their purchases. And that means I've seen thousands of condos and gone to pretty much every building there is in the neighborhood. So not only do I have the experience to help guide you as to what is happening right now, but I've got the knowledge of many buildings from years past and seen how they've been doing. Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? Are they well maintained? What sort of work they had done before, and be able to give you the advantage of that information that only I can share with that experience that I have. So before we end this video, again, remember to subscribe if you like this content, but don't leave yet. I want to make sure that I share one more mistake with you that hardly anybody talks about. So now on to mistake number 8, the bonus mistake that hardly anybody talks about, and that is valuing your time. You have to place value on your time. So what do I mean by that? What does she mean in terms of buying a strata condo? If you are looking at a high-rise building, one of the things that you want to take a look at is how many elevators there are. Now, it's not unusual for there to be 2 elevators, but are there 3? The reason being, and especially when you live on the higher floors, is that during the morning rush time, during the afternoon rush time, during the weekend when Shali's doing an open house in your building, during the times when maybe one elevator is down, it is not unusual for you to wait up to 15 to 20 minutes for the elevator to finally get to you and to bring you down to the lobby or the floor. Now, or to your parking level. Now, the other thing too is you're, aside from those multiple trips that you are doing in the elevator, those trips also add up. If, like myself, you have a dog and the dog needs to go out multiple times a day, you also possibly have to go throw out the garbage. Most buildings in Vancouver don't have a garbage chute anymore. So this again is going to be something that is going to affect your time. And if you are doing this on the daily, you have to be able to, at least if you're considering purchasing in a specific building, consider, well, aside from your patience level, how much earlier do you have to leave every morning to ensure that you're giving yourself enough time to leave, and how much time when you come back home, and so forth. So the other thing that is going to strip away your time is the parking. How deep is your parking space? We talked about parking allocation, so it's not a first come first serve where you can just park anywhere you want. You have to park in your designated parking spot. And again, with the high density of buildings that are coming up, it is not unusual for parking levels to go down as deep as P8, P9. Now, P1 is usually reserved for commercial, for loading, for visitor parking. So most residential parking levels tend to start at P2, if not P3, and work their way down. So if you have your unit's parking designation in P8, P9, now in addition to that 15 minutes at the elevator, tack on another 10 minutes just to come back up to street level, because just going around the parking levels, as well as waiting for the gates to close behind you or waiting for the car in front of you to leave so then you can open the gate, is going to add tremendously to your time. So again, this is something that you want to consider when you are doing showings, is how much more time are you taking by being in one condo or another. Now in Richmond, I will say this is not too big an issue, because in Richmond, first of all, we don't have high rises like there are in downtown Vancouver, but our maximum building heights are 16 to 18 stories because of the proximity to the airport. So we don't have as long waiting times for the elevator. And also we don't have parking that goes underground, because all of our parking is reserved above ground because of the water table. So typically, again, because it's only 18 stories, not as high density, it's P1 to P3. But it's still something important to keep in mind, especially when there's only 2 elevators. That busy time really can add up. Again, if you are on the 16th, 17th, 18th floor, you do have a little bit extra wait time. And also you don't have necessarily the luxury of just being able to go down the stairs because you're only on 2nd or 3rd floor as a quick fix as well. I mean, you could, and you can then get the benefit of adding to your steps, but you understand what I'm saying in terms of the daily ins and outs of the building. This is going to make a big difference. So that's a bonus mistake I want you guys to keep in mind and be aware of. I have lots of other things that I share with my clients that I'm working with, and constantly helping them point out things that they may not be aware of, only because I use my experience and expertise to ensure that they are paying attention to these things. So by the time we're done our search for a condo, they become experts as well. And that's part of the experience that they have, is knowing that they're in the right hands and that they have everything that they possibly need in terms of information before making an informed decision. So those are all the mistakes to avoid. I hope they've helped you immensely. Hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss the next few videos. And thank you so much for watching to the end. Moving to a new city and relocating is very challenging, and I really hope you don't go it alone. And if you're not currently working with a realtor, then I happily apply for that position. If you're not ready to reach out yet, then I'm happy to have that position from a distance and to be able to help you through putting out these videos and getting you the information you need until you're ready to make the move.